Welcome to our web exclusive. I'm Mike Montecalvo, along with Eyewitness News analyst Lieutenant General Reginald Centracchio. The latest developments now on what's going on in Crimea. NATO's cooperation with Russia is coming to an end, basically, General, because of the annexation of Crimea. For all practical purposes, this is the worst we've seen it since, what, the Cold War?
Absolutely, since the Cold War ended, certainly. But what it's done is it opened up a new, not so much a confrontation, but certainly a relationship that is strained at best. When you talk about the kind of relationship that Russia once had right after the Soviet Union dispersed, it was decent, it was livable. But now I think it's going the other way, unfortunately.
Well, all practical civilian and military cooperation, we're talking about civilian just a second ago, but now military cooperation with Russia has been suspended. What does that mean?
Well, that means that there won't be any joint sharing of information, perhaps even joint exercises to some extent, because now they're looking at Russia as the adversary. And what they're doing is looking at NATO as the other side of that confrontation. Should there be any military confrontation, there certainly won't be any sharing of information and cooperation.
You know, you're talking about the sharing of information. It seems like we have three islands here. We have Russia, NATO, and then, of course, terrorists that we've been dealing with now for the last decade and so.
That's the only common ground. That's the only common ground that I see would be able to have some kind of integrity between Russia, NATO, Crimea, and Ukraine, and all those other countries, because they're all subject to terrorism. So they do share a common base to some extent.
So even with all of this going on, Russia is still, let's say, playing on our field when it comes to this?
When it comes to terrorism, I think so, because we've seen over the last several years, Russia has been an equal target for terrorism as well as every other country. So I think when it comes to sharing information about protecting the integrity of Russia as it relates to terrorism, I think you'll see some cooperation, but not for the defense and security of Ukraine.
Well, the United States is taking down its forces. They've also made a commitment to NATO. So what does this mean if something gets out of control? Are we going to, get the National Guard activated again?
Mike, I hope that someone's looking at the big picture. Last week we were talking about taking the military down, the Army down to 440,000, unprecedented since after the World War II. And when you look at the kind of budget constraints that we're looking at, $500 billion over the next 10 years for the military, and at the same time, we're making additional commitments to bolstering up our support to NATO. It just doesn't jive. So the only alternative that I can see, looking at all aspects of it, is if you need to have an immediate deployment, of course, the reserve components, specifically the National Guard and Army Reserve, and other reserve components would perhaps be looked at first before you try to bring that force back up.
How does NATO reassure its allies that everything's going to be all right?
Well, I think they are satisfied. Looking at the technical aspects of it, too, the information technology and the kind of weapon systems we have and the kind of ordnance, you don't really need, right now, boots on the ground. So I think we're looking at, such as F-16s, we just increased that to 12 for NATO, which is an increase of, I believe, about 6. But when you look at the technical capability that we have on weapon systems, that they're bringing to the table versus number of troops on the ground.
Well, look at Russia's army, million. Crimea, 180,000. They're not in the same league here.
No, you're not. But at the same time, I think the technology we have is superior to Russia, and it's superior to most countries that we would have any kind of a military confrontation with. So there is a balance there. As far as numbers are concerned, troops versus troops, we would probably be hurting in that area. But as far as technical capability and be able to put ordnance where it needs to be, we do have the edge.
NATO's next meeting is June. What do we see between now and then?
Well, perhaps just a constant maneuvering, because you can't disengage the social or the political aspects from the military considerations. That sometimes they're going to dovetail, and I think you'll see it going back and forth between Kerry and his counterparts in trying to come to some conclusion, as well as maintain our commitment to NATO and not having Russia off to itself and being the main adversary of why we're protecting those countries within NATO.
And quickly, General, what does Putin want out of all of this?
Putin, I want, once again, he changes from day to day. I think if you listen to him, he's looking to protect the Russian aspects of the Crimea. In my opinion, he's looking more power and probably trying to reestablish the Soviet Union.
All right, General, as always, thank you for your thoughts, and thanks for watching.